Hey Lilies! Today we're going to talk about my disability. And no, I don't mean my autism. The topic of today's video is using a controller on the Hive. It's a slightly unusual choice, I'm aware, especially for someone who plays this server as much as I do. So today I'm going to go through the pros and the cons of using a controller, why I still choose to play this way, and whether it might actually make sense for you. Hope you enjoy! For this video, everything you're seeing and everything I'm talking about is Bedwars, and that's on purpose. Not because Bedwars is where controller looks the worst. If I wanted to show that as harshly as possible, I'd be playing Skywars. Skywars exposes mechanical gaps immediately. It's fast, unforgiving, and there's no margin for error. But Bedwars is where everything gets tested together. Movement, bridging, resource handling, positioning, fights, and recovery, all in one continuous loop. If you want to understand what playing on controller actually does to how you play over time, Bedwars is the clearest place to look. The first thing you'll notice is how the movement looks. It's smooth, but it isn't precise. That's just a hardware reality. Joystick precision doesn't match mouse precision. With a mouse, you can put the camera exactly where you want it instantly. With a controller, the camera moves toward where you want it to be and settles slightly after. Most of the time that's fine. It can even feel good. But Bedwars regularly demands quick, decisive reactions, and any delay has consequences. That becomes obvious as soon as fights start. There's very little flicking on controller, not because flicking is a bad idea, but because it's mechanically limited. Even at maximum sensitivity, the turning speed just isn't comparable to a mouse. Rapid 180s are harder. Vertical aim is awkward, especially when fights move above or below you. Because of that, controller play leans more toward preparation than reaction. You pre-aim corners. You line your camera up early. You try to already be looking where the fight is going to happen. And when fights unfold the way you expect, that works. Until they don't. Aim on controller is always slightly approximate. Micro adjustments are harder, and tracking fast, strafing players is inconsistent. Hive does have aim assist, but it's inconsistent enough that you can't rely on it. Sometimes it helps a lot, sometimes it barely does anything. That inconsistency makes muscle memory harder to stabilise. You're practicing, but the feedback you get isn't always the same. You notice this most clearly with bows. On keyboard and mouse, bow fights feel fluid. You track the player, adjust mid-draw, and correct as they move. On controller, doing all of that at once is much harder. You're usually choosing between tracking well or correcting quickly, not both. All of this puts a real ceiling on reaction speed. Not mentally, but physically. Thumb travel is slower than finger clicks. Turning, aiming, jumping, placing blocks, swapping items, all of these actions compete for the same limited set of inputs. When something sudden happens, you usually know exactly what you want to do. Your hands just can't always do it fast enough. This is also where click speed comes in. On keyboard and mouse, spam clicking is mechanically rewarded. Most Hive players aren't doing anything exotic. They're jitter clicking. It's reliable, learnable, and lets you sit comfortably at much higher CPS without thinking about it. On controller, that ceiling is much lower. I sit around 6 to 8 CPS. Some controller players can go higher, but it's uncommon, uncomfortable, and hard to sustain. So instead of trying to compete on raw click speed, controller play shifts toward timed hits. timed hits matter on every input method, but on controller, they're essential. You're focusing on spacing, rhythm, and knockback rather than trying to overwhelm someone with sheer clicking speed. You're playing the timing of hits, not the volume of them. That's not a consolation strategy, it's a structural adaptation, but it does mean that when fights become chaotic, spam heavy, or vertically messy, controller is at a disadvantage. Inventory management compounds this. Chest looting is slower. Hotbar cycling replaces direct access. Dropping or swapping items mid-fight is clunky. In calm moments, this is manageable. Under pressure, it costs time, not skill, time. None of these issues are huge on their own, they're just constant, and over time they add up. And that matters because the way you play something every day doesn't just affect outcomes, it slowly trains what you pay attention to, and what you stop noticing. That's especially noticeable with clutching. Pearl clutching on controller requires committing earlier. On keyboard and mouse, you can wait, react, and still correct. On controller, by the time you've adjusted your aim and input, the window is already closing. Block clutching works the same way. You're not reacting late, you're committing early, with less certainty. That reduces your ability to recover if something goes wrong. Camera control feeds into this too. Joysticks make rapid correction slower by nature. You see it clearly when bridging. Straight bridging is stable. Diagonal bridging reduces your margin for error significantly. Even a small amount of joystick drift, something you don't always notice immediately, can send you into the void. And joystick drift is its own problem. Controller hardware degrades in many very visible ways. Analog sticks wear down, drift develops, dead zones increase. You're constantly balancing sensitivity against control. Keyboard hardware degrades too, switches wear, keys die, but the failure modes are different, and often easier to isolate or replace. With controllers, wear is more central to the experience. That's why I'm planning to replace my analog sticks with TMR joysticks at some point. They're more precise, more durable, and far less prone to drift. But even that highlights something important. Controller performance is tightly tied to hardware condition. That's not an excuse, it's just part of the reality. At some point, it stops being about what the game rewards most and starts being about what you want the game to be for. Because optimisation answers one question very well: how do I win the most fights? But it doesn't tell you how the game feels over time, or whether you still want to be playing after the 4,000th match. This is where controller starts to make sense for me. One of the biggest strengths of controller is that it rewards organisation, because when your inputs are slower and less flexible, consistency matters more. You can't rely on last-second reactions, so you build systems. My inventory is always organised the same way. Emeralds, diamonds, gold, iron. In that order, always in the top left spaces of my inventory, every game. That means when I open the shop, I already know exactly how far I need to move the joystick. There's no searching, no hesitation, it's muscle memory. My hotbar is just as fixed. Sword in slot 1, blocks in slot 2, pickaxe in slot 3. If I have pearls, they go in slot 2. Blocks and pickaxe slide one to the right automatically. Arrows are always in slot 7. Jet booster or chest plate goes in slot 8, whichever one I'm not actively using. Bow is always in slot 9. Anything variable like extra blocks, golden apples, potions, lives in the middle slots, 4 to 6. That consistency isn't aesthetic, it's functional. On controller, knowing exactly where things are matters more than being able to reach everything instantly. You're planning fun movement in advance. Controller rewards that kind of deliberate setup. It also pairs naturally with timed hits. Because I'm not trying to outclick anyone, I'm spacing, timing, and choosing when to hit. That makes fights slower, but also cleaner. I'm not panicking, and I'm not gambling on CPS. That style carries over into movement and positioning. Analog movement feels natural in Minecraft. Strafing is smooth, direction changes are continuous, parkour feels fluid rather than mechanical. On controller, movement feels less like issuing commands and more like just moving. In Bedwars, where spacing and positioning matter constantly, that changes how you approach fights. I play slightly further back than I used to. Not because I'm scared, but because I'm more aware of distance and momentum. There are fights I don't take anymore. Not because I can't win them, but because I know they'll drag me into chaos, and chaos is where controller struggles the most. That's a trade-off, and it's a deliberate one. There's also a real comfort advantage. Controller play is physically easier. My posture is more relaxed. My hands are under less strain. Long sessions are genuinely sustainable. Fatigue shows up as rushed decisions and unnecessary risks long before you consciously notice it. Being comfortable helps me stay calm. Staying calm helps me play better Bedwars. That calm feeds into flow. I spend less time thinking about inputs and more time thinking about the game. I'm not fighting the controls, I'm just playing. It also reduces cognitive load. With fewer inputs to juggle, more attention becomes available. It's easier to talk while playing, easier to explain decisions, easier to notice what's happening around me. That's not incidental, it's central to this channel. The way I play and the way I talk are linked. Controller lets those two things coexist instead of competing. There's also consistency. Even when controller is worse, it's predictably worse. I know my limits. I know which situations favour me and which don't. I know when to commit and when to disengage early. Over time, that approach becomes your default. And this is also what I learned on. My instincts live here. Switching wouldn't just be an upgrade, it would mean relearning the game from scratch. At some point, that trade-off stops being worth it. Controller also allows for more nuance than people give it credit for. Variable walking speed, subtle camera movement, a slightly more cinematic feel. Those details don't win fights directly, but they shape how the game feels minute to minute. And that feeling matters if you're playing a lot. I know this is a very long way of saying I like my controller, but it's not really about the controller. It's about choosing a way of playing that I can live inside comfortably. A bit of friction isn't always bad. Sometimes it slows you down just enough to keep you deliberate instead of frantic. Controller creates space. Space to move smoothly. Space to think before reacting. Space to stay organised instead of rushing everything. From a meta perspective, controller isn't optimal. But from the perspective of how I want to play Bedwars, how I want it to feel, and how I want to show up while playing, it absolutely is. I know controller isn't optimal. I know I'd probably win more fights if I switched. but I wouldn't enjoy the game as much, and for me, that really matters. Tools don't just change how well you play, they change how you experience the game. What you notice, how you move. They shape what kind of player you become. And this way of playing feels like mine. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day.